retired Army Special Forces Chief Warrant Officer, served over 20 years, 11 deployments, Gold Star husband, lost his wife, Petty Officer, Chief Petty Officer Shannon Kent, who was killed in 2019 on an ISIS thing in Syria. That's Syria, not Libya, because apparently President Biden can't tell the difference between the two of them.
And he studied. I know, and he studied. I can't believe he missed it. Okay.
Yeah, well, when your wife does the cramming, I guess that's the thing. Anyway, the fun part about this is that we're helping out the America First candidates. And Joe, you want to give us why you're running and basically what you think about bringing back jobs and immigration and what we can do to put us back in first instead of just being the people that pay the bills.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on. So like you said in your introduction, I served for a little bit over 20 years in the Special Forces. I came in right before 9/11. All I ever wanted to do was be a soldier and go serve this country overseas. So when I turned 18, I did just that. I enlisted in the Army, worked my way into Ranger Regiment and then Special Forces. So right after 9/11, that kind of started the trajectory of the rest of my career, which was deploying to combat zones and fighting our nation's wars. So in that time, I got to see the best and the worst of this country. The best was working with and leading young men and young women from all walks of life, all races, creeds, from every part of this country to go and serve our nation because we believe in this nation and we know it's the most special place in the entire world. And so we were all eager to go and defend it. The downside, the bad side that I saw was that our government, our permanent ruling class from both sides of the aisle had no issue with lying to the American people about why we were at war. They had no issue with sending young men and women off into harm's way to be killed, to be maimed, all for no actual gain for our nation. So right after 9/11, we went to war for all the right reasons. We had to go fight Al-Qaeda. But shortly after that, we deviated into missions of regime change and mostly based on lies, especially with the Iraq war that I served in a good deal. So I was very refreshed by President Trump's America First foreign policy, the way that he stated a clearly defined military objective and then let us go and pursue those enemies. And then once we defeated them, he wanted us to end those wars, to get out of them because there was no further gain for the United States. So I really supported President Trump's America First agenda. I intended to stay in the special operations community. I actually retired from the military and started working in the CIA. And intended to stay in that capacity for the next several years. That wasn't until 2 years ago when, as you said, my late wife, Shannon Kent, was killed fighting ISIS in Syria. So Shannon being killed was obviously the most tragic and traumatic experience that I've ever faced. However, she was killed at a very pivotal time in our nation's history. She was killed a month after President Trump attempted to get our troops out of Syria the first time. And that's when we saw the same permanent ruling political class of unelected bureaucrats turn against President Trump. And when they did that, they weren't just turning against President Trump. They were turning against the will of the American people to further their own selfish objectives. So Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis and several other unelected bureaucrats resigned and then started to use the bureaucracy and slow roll to keep our troops in Syria, where they remain in harm's way to this day. A month later, my wife and 3 other great Americans were killed fighting ISIS in Syria. So that was a wake-up call to me. I realized I needed to start speaking out against all the carnage that the permanent ruling class had done to our nation, because I spent most of my career trying to find ground truth on the ground overseas in our conflicts, and it just was never getting relayed back to our leaders in Washington. I see the same thing in our society right now, the way that our economy is absolutely being driven off a cliff. All of our manufacturing jobs have been shipped overseas. It's almost impossible for a young man or young woman to graduate high school and to go into a job that will pay a decent wage, let them raise a family. That's because our permanent ruling class on the corporate side has shipped all our jobs overseas. This has made us strategically vulnerable. While we were trying to build democracies out of Arab militias and Pashtun tribes, the Chinese were maneuvering on us because the permanent ruling class let them into the world economy, shipped our jobs over there, and now we're in this position where we rely on the Chinese to buy off our debt bonds. The problem is we don't produce anything anymore. So at a time of their choosing, the Chinese Communist Party could choose to stop buying our debt bonds, challenge our status as a prime reserve holder, crash our dollar, and the permanent ruling class is doing nothing about this. Joe Biden continues to add trillions onto the national debt, and so we're in this position where we can continue to add debt, inflation's going to go up, or we're going to have to continue to raise taxes. There's been no solution for how we're going to put this generation, my generation and younger, to work, to give them a stake in the economy. The permanent ruling class wants them essentially jobless, working in the gig economy, saddled with college debt, unable to purchase houses because we have massive corporations buying off all the housing right now. The system right now is just extremely rigged against the average American, against the working men and the working women. So my goal is to get in there into Washington, D.C., to get rid of establishment Republicans like the woman that I'm running against, Jamie Herrera Butler, who's done nothing to further the America First agenda. She's done nothing to fight for this district. She supports open borders. She's voted against the construction of the border wall. She said nothing about Antifa as they burned our cities down. She sided with the Democrats when they tried to prevent President Trump from deploying troops to deal with Antifa. She's pro-immigration. She voted for amnesty. We have to get these issues taken care of. We have to be able to take the resources that we have here that we're blessed with in our country and be able to provide for our people. That includes everything from jobs to securing our borders to fixing our immigration process so we're not importing workers that take jobs away from American workers. That, to me, is what the America First agenda is all about and what we need to bring to Washington, D.C.
Joe, right now we have a lot of problems with not enforcing the laws that are already on the books, and we're seeing crime going up wherever the immigration is going up. You know, one of the biggest things that they told us is we didn't need guns because the police would protect us, but now we see the mayors telling the police not to show up. What can we do in Congress to help out on that?
Yeah, this is a major issue, especially here in the Pacific Northwest. So my district, for folks who aren't familiar, we are right on the Oregon of Washington border, southwest Washington. So our major urban hub, Vancouver, Washington, is essentially a suburb of Portland. So the rioting that's gone on in Portland, Oregon, that the mainstream media hardly even reports on anymore because it's so frequent, really affects our district. And as I said, Antifa and BLM, these terrorists, have marched into our district before, and they've gone unchecked. The problem is we have these activist mayors in places like Portland. Seattle's just our north, so we're really sandwiched. We're really squeezed, that won't enforce the rule of law. So I think with federal law enforcement, we need to have the Department of Justice actually focus on Antifa and BLM, treat them as the terrorist organizations that they are, and then we need to ostensibly use federal funding to fund sheriff's departments and law enforcement agencies that will enforce the rule of law and then punish those that will not. So Portland, Oregon and Seattle, Washington do not deserve one more penny of federal funding until they actually start prosecuting these criminals.
Joe, this is Russ in Yuma, Arizona. And encouraging to hear. I know you thought this out pretty well, it sounds like. Now, have you received any help from the Republican Party or contact from President Trump? I know you're running against someone that voted to impeach him.
Yes, so I have a pretty good relationship with the Trump administration, President Trump himself, and then the folks that are around him. So I was going to go back and work in a second Trump administration in the national security realm. So as soon as Jamie Herrera Butler voted for impeachment and I threw my name in the hat, I reached out to some of them. I was fortunate enough to get a short meeting with President Trump about a month ago in Mar-a-Lago just to brief him on the status of the race. So the Trump side has been extremely supportive. I'm working as hard as I can to show him that I can independently raise funds because that's key to him for America First candidates. We have to be able to stand up on our own, and I love that. I love the competition. I love the way that he wants to pick winners. But as far as the Republican apparatus goes, it's been mixed here at the local level in the 3rd Congressional District. All of our county Republican committees, they've censured Jamie Herrera Butler. So the grassroots and even the establishment Republicans here in the district are enthusiastic to get rid of her.
Now, you're in a blue state surrounded by blue cities. Is there a lot of support for Republican candidates out in the away from the cities?
There absolutely is. I think Washington State is just like a lot of cities or states on the West Coast, and actually throughout the country. So our politics are heavily dictated by one failed city. That's Seattle, which is a tragedy because Seattle's a beautiful city, but that's where the population center lies, and that's kind of who controls a lot of what goes on in our state. But when you get outside of Seattle, it is really working class, middle class, Trump country, America first, people that want to do the right thing by our nation and live by true conservative values. So there's a lot of grassroots support out here in Washington State.
Any poll numbers done early on yet that show your standing?
We haven't had any polling done yet as far as this race goes. We're still in R+5 district. President Trump did really well in 2016 and 2020.
Okay. Well, you should be. I was shocked at, and I don't know if you were, but shocked about so many Republicans that voted to impeach President Trump.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it is really disgraceful. I mean, especially now that we've seen so much more of the narrative of January 6th just crumble as we learn more and more facts. So, and Jamie Herbert Butler continues to double and triple down. I don't know if people remember, but she not only volunteered, or she not only voted for impeachment, but she volunteered to be the star witness in the Senate trial. That was who they were going to actually have come and testify.
Didn't know.
And she just continues to double down on this rhetoric. She still insists that there was this massive insurrection that somehow President Trump could have stopped by live tweeting the event. None of it actually makes any sense, and it's all counter to all the facts that we know. So it's part of a narrative to kill off the gains that we had with the Trump policies. That's what really threatens the establishment. They're using January 6th to try and kill off President Trump's legacy, and then also to target every single Trump supporter and conservative as some sort of an insurrectionist or terrorist. So it's actually very dangerous.
Yeah. Well, when you're elected, I'd like for it if you can get your hands on some video. Now, January 6th was heavily videoed. That entire complex is videoed. It's all frozen. You can't get it. There's no information that we can get it because they realize if they release the video, at least my feeling is that there was no insurrection.
Yeah, it runs counter to their entire narrative. I mean, we saw what they tried to do with the tragic death of Officer Sicknick. They had this narrative that he was beaten to death by Trump supporters. Then they had this other narrative that he somehow, was asphyxiated by bear spray. And then that's counter to the actual timeline. That's counter to the autopsy. So if they were willing to lie about that man's tragic death, think about what else they're willing to lie about. We've seen the footage of some of the Capitol Police officers letting the rioters into the building, and that's no ding on them. I think it was just a failure to plan on the side of the D.C. leadership and then on the side of the National Capitol Police. I think the individual officers that had to guard those doors, I don't think they had clear guidance because you saw some that wanted to defend their doors and fought hard, and then you saw other ones that just let the rioters in. So I think it's really a big leadership failure. I think there's a massive cover-up going on because people are embarrassed about how poorly they handled that situation. And the media plays along with it, too.
I agree with part of that. I think there was a cover-up, but I think the plan was to let them in. I mean, AOC knew a week ahead of time it was going to happen, and they turned down the National Guard. There was weak support. I mean, weak planning on the protection. So I think that was the plan, is to let this happen. And maybe I've become a conspiracy theorist.
Well, it's hard not to nowadays since the media just lies so much. None of that would surprise me. I mean, really, but I think we owe it to the American people to lay it all out there because we've just let this media completely control the narrative. So, I mean, I don't agree with the way they're going to go about the January 6th commission, but I do think we need to declassify all that video footage. There's no reason why the Capitol Police aren't wearing body cameras, why we can't do Freedom of Information Act requests about the Capitol Police. I don't see why they're the one standalone organization that we can't FOIA. I think that's absolutely ridiculous.
Completely agree. I think they also should go ahead and try everyone they've got in custody or let them out. But, they've been holding them since January 6th. And they're not doing anything with them. They're just holding them as if they're in Guantanamo or something. And the few that they did bring before the judge kicked it out because, it was obvious to him there was no violence or anything. They were let in, according to the video that we don't get to see.
Right. Yeah. It's ridiculous to have this situation here in America. Due process is not being followed, and they're essentially political prisoners. I mean, like you said, if there's actual charges and they know these people did something violent, well, then charge them, give them their day in court as every American is entitled to. But the way that they're being held, as you said, in Gitmo or as some sort of political prisoner, I just think that's unacceptable.
You are now my favorite candidate from Washington.
Thank you.
Well, George, I'm running out of time, my friend.
Okay, hey, thanks for coming on, Joe, and we'll have you on again if we can possibly do that before the election.
No, that's great. Thank you so much.
Our condolences on your wife and the best to your family, and we'll